Lights will guide you home, and I promise I will burn for you, by rayrae118, Chapter 20. Percy Weasley wasn't an idiot. People have called him a lot of things over the years, but unintelligent wasn't one of them. Ambitious, driven, determined, but not stupid. He knew he was being punished right now, and, to be perfectly honest, he didn't quite blame them. A few years ago, things had looked so promising. He had graduated Hogwarts at the top of his classes, 12 NEWTs, head boy, and had gotten a job with a prominent office at the Ministry of Magic. Perhaps he should have started questioning things more when he started receiving instructions from his boss by mail. But he had just been so thrilled to be given such responsibility that he hadn't second-guessed it. In hindsight, not the best idea. When it had been revealed that Mr. Crouch had been murdered months earlier by his own son, whom he had smuggled out of Azkaban and had kept under constant Imperius, Percy had found himself on the receiving end of quite a bit of inquisition. Still, he had escaped relatively unscathed, and shortly after had found himself promoted to Minister Fudge's own office. Again, perhaps, he should have questioned things. But he had been so excited. Someone was finally recognising his brilliance and was rewarding him for it. Much better than his own family, who pranked him and scorned him for his bookish nature. At least, that's the way he saw it. But maybe he had been too harsh to judge. He knew he wasn't the only smart one in his family. Bill had received the same number of NEWTs, and had been head boy as well. Charlie had focused more on his areas of interest, but had graduated near the top of his class, Gryffindor Quidditch captain, and all that. And even his younger siblings, he knew they were intelligent. They all just showed it differently. Sure, the twins joked around and barely scraped 6 OWLs and NEWTs between them. But he had taken a look around their shop, in disguise of course, lest they recognise him, and some of the work involved in creating those pranks was actually impressive. He had actually begun to wonder if they hadn't failed so many OWLs on purpose. Now that he thought about it, it did make sense, what they had done. Fred had taken the NEWT courses in potions, transfiguration, and arithmancy, while George had done charms, ancient runes, and herbology. Together, they had covered the most important classes. As for Ron and Ginny, he knew his brother was a brilliant strategist. No one had lost to him at chess in years. Ginny had always been smart, and he knew she would succeed in whatever she attempted. So, if they were all so intelligent, why was he the only one who was ostracized for it? What was so wrong with wanting to succeed? Perhaps it was because, of all of them, he was the only one who shoved it in their faces. He could understand now how they may have taken his studious nature. But he knew he was intelligent, and knew he was destined for success. It was one of the reasons he hadn't questioned it when Minister Fudge had offered him a position in his office as junior undersecretary. He had flown off the handle at his father because, well, why couldn't he understand and be happy that Percy was succeeding? Didn't he want that? Perhaps he had been so defensive because he hadn't wanted to acknowledge the truth in his father's words. And there was some truth there. It hadn't been even 6 months later, when Minister Fudge had been removed from office, Amelia Bones elected as interim minister, and Percy effectively cut off at the knees. The first thing Madam Bones, Minister Bones, he corrected himself, had done was sort through Fudge's former staff, and remove those she didn't feel were suited to their positions. Percy had been one of those. Oh, he hadn't been fired, just shifted sideways and down, into a position in the Department of Magical Transportation. He knew it was because Minister Bones felt she couldn't trust him. And could he really blame her? At the time he had been suitably upset, but over the course of the last year and a half, he had done a lot of thinking. and had come to the conclusion that she had been right. He hadn't been ready for that position. His dad was right as well. The only reason he had been promoted was because Fudge wanted him close. For some reason, the former minister had thought he could be used to spy on his family, Dumbledore, and Harry. Harry. Percy hadn't been too thrilled to learn of his sister's relationship with the boy who lived. At first, but after Harry made his plea, Percy had decided to tentatively trust him. It seemed like he really cared for Ginny and would do anything to protect her. So, why had he been so quick to follow the minister and believe Harry to be nothing more than an attention-seeking liar? He was ashamed of the letter he had sent to Ron the previous year. Harry had never given him any reason to believe any of the drivel that had come out of the former minister's mouth. He had just believed Fudge because that was easier than admitting that you-know-who was back. And because Fudge was the minister. Surely that meant he couldn't be wrong. Right? No. Not right. Percy's faith in authority figures had been badly shaken after Fudge's removal from office. He couldn't believe he had estranged himself from his family just to further his own career. Actually, he snorted derisively, he could. He was ambitious. He had wanted to move ahead, and hadn't really thought about the strain he was putting on his family, beyond his sniping that they'd never believe in him. He wanted to reconcile, and knew he would need to be the one to take that step. He had been wrong, and he wanted his family back. That was the one thing the Weasleys prided themselves on. They always remained a family. No matter what, they looked out for each other. He just had to swallow his damn pride and take the first step. And that meant walking the 30 feet down Diagon Alley to greet his father. Percy had been on his way home when he had remembered that it was his mother's birthday in just a few days. He had thought he might pick up a present for her in the alley and bring it to the Burrow on her birthday to begin the reconciliation process. He had been making his way down one of the shops, a book of knitting patterns wrapped and shrunken into his pocket, when all hell had broken loose. His wand had been held in his hand before he had even consciously thought about it. Percy Weasley was no slouch. Their opposition had been Death Eaters. There were at least 20 of them, and as he fired and protected himself, he thought he could recognise a few. Rodolphus and Rabistan Lestrange. Not. He was certain he caught a glimpse of Lucius Malfoy's pale blonde flowing hair, and the hulking figures of Crabbe and Goyle Sr. Percy was exhausted by the time the fight was over. The Death Eaters had all apparated away, and the Aurors had arrived. Percy glimpsed Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall near Gringotts, talking to Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Head Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt. He had been relieved to see the headmaster there, since he knew that Dumbledore was the most powerful wizard alive. Whatever else the man was, he could at least acknowledge that. Glancing round the alley, he saw several other adults milling about, helping shopkeepers clean up, or assisting with moving the injured to St. Mungo's. His heart thudded painfully as he recognised Fred and George standing with his father, followed quickly by relief that they were all right. He was quickly caught up in the clean-up, helping a nearby shopkeeper board up the broken window. The next hour passed by quickly as he helped out wherever he could, and before he knew it, the Aurors were insisting everyone go home. Steeling himself, he turned to face his family once more. They were outside Fred and George's shop, clearly getting ready to go inside, no doubt to use the flue, or, in the twins' case, retire for the evening. Percy knew that now was his best chance, so he jumped upon it before he lost his nerve. Collecting his Gryffindor courage, he marched determinedly up to the Weasley trio. "Dad?" Arthur turned quickly in surprise and then gasped. "Percy?" Fred and George also looked confused, but didn't say anything as Arthur reached out and quickly grasped his third oldest son in a tight hug. "Well, were you here the whole time?" the Weasley patriarch asked, pulling back. Percy nodded shakily. "I had an errand to run on my way home. I was leaving when the Death Eaters arrived." Arthur exhaled unsteadily. "I'm so glad you're all right." Percy bit his lip. "You too." He looked past Arthur to the twins. "All of you." He hesitated and then blew out a breath of air. "Dad, I'm sorry." Arthur frowned. "Percy." But Percy interrupted, needing to get this out. "You're right, Dad. I was just too proud and arrogant to see it. I didn't want to believe that I was promoted for anything other than myself. But you were just looking out for me. I understand that now. Family is too important to waste." Arthur sniffed, leaning forward to hug Percy again. "It's all right, son," he breathed, relishing in the fact that his boy was in his arms. He had hoped that Percy would come back to them, and he knew how distraught Molly had been. But after so long had passed, he had begun to feel like it may never happen. Percy let out a weak chuckle as he turned his attention to the twins. "I'm glad you guys are okay." He wiped his nose and attempted to collect himself. Of course, the twins had no compunctions over grabbing the stuffy former head boy in an extravagant hug. "Percy, old chap, how spiffering to see you again!" Fred exclaimed. "Truly wonderful!" George chimed in. Percy rolled his eyes as they let go, but didn't comment. The twins would be the twins. Always joking. He figured that was how they coped with everything. And everyone could use a few laughs now and then, right? He nodded towards the shop behind them. "You two did a good job in there," he admitted, rolling his eyes at the gasps the twins let out. "I mean it. I took a look around one time. The magic you put into your products is quite impressive." Fred and George just looked at each other in surprise. "Did he just compliment us?" George picked up for his twin. "Amazing!" they exclaimed together. Arthur smiled fondly. "Percy, why don't you come back to the Burrow with us? Molly will be worried. I don't know she'll be ecstatic to see you." Percy hesitated for only a moment, before he nodded uncertainly. "I'd like to see Mum," he said softly. Arthur's smile widened. "Come on then, boys. It's getting chilly out. You'd think it was March, not June." The old chuckled and headed into the twins' shop to use the flue. Line break. Harry's stomach dropped when Dumbledore went flying off the astronomy tower. He had his issues with the headmaster, but he knew what it would do to the war effort if Dumbledore died. Not to mention whatever problems they had, he didn't really want the old man dead. As soon as Dumbledore fell, Bellatrix gave a glad cry. "It's over! Time to go!" she shouted, before quickly turning and running down the stairs, the other Death Eaters following her, forgetting about the strangely invisible opposition they had been receiving. Harry knew he had to do something, but didn't know what. He reached out with his magic and just grabbed. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he felt it when Dumbledore was caught in a wave of his magic. He was just in time, lowering the headmaster to the remaining 3 feet to the ground. He hoped Dumbledore was still alive, but didn't have time to go now and check. The Death Eaters were still in the castle. Harry ran as fast as he could back to the entrance hall, only to find the fight over when he arrived. Students and adults were milling around, looking after injured fighters or standing in front of the doors that led to the outside. He immediately sought out Ginny, and found her kneeling next to a student off to one side. He hurriedly rushed over, hoping that whoever it was all right. Ginny looked up and smiled slightly as her boyfriend knelt down. Harry's stomach dropped slightly at seeing Hannah Abbott unconscious on the ground. Ginny swallowed. "I think she'll be all right," she assured him. "I saw her thrown across the room by a stunner, I think, and she hit a wall. Madame Pomfrey should be able to heal her.
Harry nodded and let out a sigh of relief. Why are people standing in front of the door?
He asked, glancing over to them. It was mostly students. Hermione, Neville, Susan and Luna, and Professor Flitwick. Ginny looked over as well. The Death Eaters put up some sort of ward. No one can get out. A few minutes before you showed up, Bellatrix and a group of Death Eaters ran through, yelling, "It's done!" All the Death Eaters here followed them outside. But when we tried to pursue, no one could get out. Best we can figure, the ward only lets people with the dark mark through. Harry bit his lip.
Why would the castle let something like that be put up? He muttered to himself.
Ginny frowned. You think the castle should be able to stop it? Harry didn't reply for a moment, as he felt some sort of answer settle in his bones. If he didn't know any better, he would say the castle was peeved at him.
He almost chuckled. Never mind, he said mentally to Ginny. Hogwarts gave me an answer.
Ginny pursed her lips. The castle spoke to you. Harry shook his head slightly.
I can't get actual words, but she still makes sure I know what she's trying to say. According to her, she's not all-powerful. She couldn't stop the ward from going up.
Ginny raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. She glanced back down at Hannah, and then stood up with a nearly inaudible groan. Harry was immediately by her side.
Are you all right? He asked worriedly.
Ginny looked over at her boyfriend and smiled. I'm fine, Harry. I'm not hurt. Just tired. Harry nodded, relieved, and took a moment to look around the room. Poppy was there already, and seemed to be triaging the students. Harry bit his lip, coming up with a plan in his head. He was glad to see Daphne and Blaise still standing, and immediately headed over to them. Daphne was interested in potions, and Blaise was considering a career in healing. Both would be well suited to help the Mediwitch. Both Slytherins looked relieved to see Harry.
Glad you're all right, Blaise said, trying not to show how worried he had been.
Daphne gave Harry a hug and pulled back, smiling softly. Harry returned the smile.
You too, he answered to Blaise. I need both of you to grab some more students who aren't hurt and help Madame Pomfrey. It looks like she's going to need it.
Both Slytherins nodded and left to find more students before reporting to Madame Pomfrey. Harry frowned. He thought he heard banging and went over to join those crowded around the door.
It sounds like people are trying to come in.
Hermione looked over and let out a shriek and gave her friend a tight hug. I'm so glad you're all right, she cried.
Harry returned the hug. You too, he replied. What's going on here?
He gestured to the door. Hermione refocused her attention. There's a ward blocking the door. We can't get down.
And the banging? Harry asked.
People trying to get in, Hermione said succinctly. We think it's Professor McGonagall, at the very least. Probably some of the Order. Harry nodded, pursing his lips as he thought.
Everyone, stand back.
Confused, the group in front of the door did as Harry ordered. Seemingly without prompting, Ginny came over to stand next to Harry. The couple grasped hands and stared at the door. Harry frowned as he felt the build-up of magic blocking the entrance. Do you feel that? Ginny asked mentally, running her eyes up and down the door in front of them. Harry nodded absent-mindedly.
It's strong, but I think together we can overpower it.
Ginny smiled tightly. Together. Their grips on each other's hands tightened, and beads of perspiration formed on their foreheads. Those watching were confused, as the two just seemed to stare at the door for several moments. Suddenly, Flitwick furrowed his brow, leaning forward slightly in anticipation. He could feel the build-up of magic surrounding the two students. Oh my, he muttered. Professor Sprout, coming to stand next to her colleague, looked over at him.
What is it?
She asked, keeping her voice quiet so as not to interrupt anything. Flitwick glanced at the herbology professor. They're going to overpower the wards, he said, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. There's quite a build-up of power developing. Those two are very powerful. A moment later, everyone was staring at Harry and Ginny as a loud shattering sound echoed around the hall. Harry and Ginny slumped slightly, but remained standing. With a loud bang, the door was thrust open, and Minerva, Sirius, Remus and Tonks ran in, looking confused and ready to battle. Harry looked at his guardians warily.
It's over, he informed them. The Death Eaters have gone. We're working on getting the injured up to the hospital wing.
Minerva nodded shakily, stowing her wand. We came back as soon as we could. There was quite a bit of opposition at Diagon Alley, and it kept us busy for a while.
Harry smiled slightly. We managed.
Minerva glanced at Poppy and was pleased to see many students helping the healer out, transporting the injured away from the entrance hall and towards the infirmary. Harry bit his lip.
I need someone to come with me,
he said softly, so that Minerva and Sirius, the closest to him, could hear.
Dumbledore fell off the astronomy tower.
Minerva gasped and immediately headed outside. Harry quickly followed her.
I slowed his fall, but I'm not sure how injured he was.
Minerva glanced at him sharply. We'll talk about this later, when we have time for the full story. But right now, let's get to Albus's side. Harry nodded, and the two made their way to the base of the astronomy tower. There was a darkened mass in front of them, and they quickened their pace. Minerva dropped to one knee next to her boss, and reached out, searching for a pulse. She was relieved to find it beating strongly beneath her fingers. She looked over at Harry and nodded shakily, before conjuring up a stretcher and loading the headmaster onto it. Together they brought Dumbledore inside, ignoring the cries of surprise at those still in the entrance hall, and hurried towards the hospital wing. Poppy was there with her student helpers, and did not allow herself to gasp when Minerva and Harry brought Dumbledore in, simply directing them to an empty bed and joining them. Minerva looked over at Harry, and, understanding, he left them, going over to get an update from Blaise.
We've got most of the injured organised, Blaise said. No one is too seriously hurt, and no casualties.
Harry breathed out a sigh of relief.
Good, he replied, and good job here. Thanks for stepping up.
Blaise nodded and got back to work, as Minerva came over and wasted no time in giving Harry a tight hug. I'm glad you're all right, she said softly, trying to get her breathing back to normal. She had been so frightened when Dumbledore had informed them that there was a disturbance at Hogwarts. Harry let out a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline beginning to leave him.
We're fine, he assured his guardian. Everything's fine.
He knew that it wasn't, really. But for now, no one had been seriously hurt, and the Death Eaters hadn't gotten what they had come for. Minerva nodded shakily, stepping back from her charge. I know you're tired, Harry, but we need to know what happened. I'm going to contact Amelia and get her here. Will you gather your friends in the Great Hall? Harry nodded his agreement and left the hospital wing, after quickly stopping to speak with Blaise and Daphne. Minerva looked over at Poppy for a moment, and then followed her charge out, knowing the Mediwitch would inform her of the headmaster's situation as soon as she was finished. Line break. True to form, when Minerva and Amelia entered the Great Hall roughly 10 minutes later, every student who wasn't injured or helping out in the infirmary was ready and waiting. Sirius, Remus, Tonks, Flitwick and Sprout were there also. Harry and his friends were at the front, clearly leaders amongst the group. Minerva noted that Blaise and Daphne were there as well, most likely feeling they should be in attendance because of their status as leaders, and leaving the assistance of Poppy to their students. When Minerva and Amelia entered, everyone turned to look at them. The two adults quickly made their way to the front of the hall, where the students were congregated. Amelia couldn't stop herself from giving Harry and Susan hugs, before she settled into a place next to Sirius. Both teenagers looked tired, but unhurt. I want to thank you all, and congratulate you on holding the castle tonight, Amelia said, looking around at the group of teenagers. It looked like nearly the entire class of 5th, 6th and 7th years. She suspected that those who weren't here were either injured and in the hospital wing, or helping Poppy with the injured. I know you're tired, but I just want to get statements from you all about what happened. Nobody is in trouble. I just need to know what happened. She glanced behind her, and was happy to see several auras entering. She had called in a few to help her collect statements. Rufus was still handling the situation at Diagon Alley, but Kingsley, Tonks, and 2 other auras she trusted completely were there. Minerva cleared her throat. Let's do this orderly. There are many of you, and only a few auras, so it may take a while. Kingsley started waving students forward, ushering most of them to where he and the other auras were standing. Amelia beckoned Harry and his friends over. I am going to take your statements, she informed them. Am I right in assuming that you were in charge of this defence? Harry nodded and Amelia smiled. Very well then. Just tell me what happened, Harry. Taking a deep breath, Harry did so, leaving out a few details as he saw fit. He would tell certain people later, but it wouldn't be wise to mention some things where anyone could overhear. He told Amelia, along with Minerva and Sirius, who were listening, about how he and Ginny had been walking back to the common room when they had discovered a planned attack on the castle that evening, and tried getting in touch with Minerva and Dumbledore, finding out that they were alone, organising the students to fight, and everything that had followed. Harry told them about what had happened on the astronomy tower, and how he and Ginny had brought down the Dark Mark ward, allowing Minerva and the others to enter. When he was finished, Amelia got statements from the others about where they had been located and what they had done to protect the castle. "I am very proud of you all," Minerva said, smiling at the students around her. "You did a great job," and held out against insurmountable odds. Minerva nodded. "I think it's safe to say that without you, things would have been a lot worse." They all looked pleased with the Transfiguration Professor's praise. Minerva looked around at the rest of the students. "It looks like things are winding down here," she observed. "You should all get to your dormitories and get some rest. As it is the end of term, you don't need to worry about attending classes tomorrow, but it has been a long night." They all nodded and left the adults in the Great Hall, making for their separate common rooms. They paused in the entrance hall for a moment, so that everyone could give Harry back their earpieces.
"Those were amazing," Ron commented. "We'll have to tell the twins they work like a charm. They'll certainly come in handy again."
Harry smiled.
"Fred and George really are geniuses, aren't they? The last letter indicated they may have something workable on the listening devices. Apparently your dad has been a great help."
Ron and Ginny beamed at the mention of their father. Arthur Weasley was a wonderful person, but because of his fascination with muggles and his seeming lack of ambition, he tended to be overlooked by most of the wizarding world. But Harry knew that Arthur had a brilliant mind in his head. After all, the spells that had gone into chanting that in Ford Angular had not been first-year charms. Harry sighed.
"You guys all did really great tonight, and I'm glad you weren't hurt."
Susan gave him a hug before stepping back into the arms of her own boyfriend, leaving room for Ginny to take over. "You're a great teacher, Harry, and a fabulous leader. You were just as amazing with all of this." The others all nodded. Harry blushed slightly, but kept smiling.
"Anyway, get some rest. Tomorrow's probably going to be pretty quiet, but I don't doubt that you're all as exhausted as I am."
In the corner of his eye, he spotted Minerva exiting the Great Hall, so he sent the others to their rooms and hurried to catch up with his guardian. Minerva smiled at him as he made his way to her side. "I am going to get a report from Poppy," she informed him. "You should get back to the tower, and I'll let you know what she tells me tomorrow." Harry nodded hesitantly.
"Do you think Dumbledore's all right?" he asked cautiously. "I mean, I have a lot of issues with him, but I wouldn't want him dead."
Minerva sighed. "I'm sure he'll be fine," she assured him. "Poppy seemed optimistic when I left her earlier." Harry bit his lip.
"Maybe now he'll listen to us a little bit more,"
he commented idly.
"I mean, he was all for giving Malfoy another chance, and look what happened."
Minerva snorted, but didn't reply, simply gesturing for him to return to Gryffindor Tower. Harry did so, marvelling at how much effort it was to climb the stairs. He knew he was in good shape, but there was a difference between working out and practicing spells, and an all-out battle with Death Eaters. "Harry, I think you've forgotten something." Ginny's voice sounded in his head, and Harry jerked, surprised.
"What do you mean?"
he asked, confused. He could feel Ginny's amusement. "The wards on the dorms."
"Oh,"
Harry replied succinctly. Damn, he had forgotten. No doubt students in all four houses were trying to get into their dorm rooms and failing.
"Yeah, I should take those down now."
"That'd be nice," Ginny replied, even more amused. He had a feeling she was just holding back from laughing at him, and probably the only one because there were students around her who would wonder why she suddenly went off. Concentrating for a minute, Harry felt the castle release the wards, and gave Hogwarts a mental thank you.
"The wards should be down," he informed Ginny.
She smiled mentally. "Thanks, Harry. See you in a minute." Sure enough, a few minutes later, Harry entered the common room to see his friends waiting for him in armchairs around the fire. "Everyone else has gone up," Neville informed him. Harry nodded.
"We should get to bed as well. It's been a long night."
Ginny nodded as well, groaning. I can barely think, I'm so exhausted. Did I really just finish my OWLs today? Harry glanced at his watch.
Yesterday, technically.
Ginny growled and elbowed him in the stomach, but Harry shrugged it off. After another moment of silence, they all got to their feet and headed to their dorms. Hermione gave Harry a tight hug before they separated to the different dormitories. You did a really great job tonight, Harry, she whispered. Harry smiled as he returned the hug.
You too, Hermione. I was proud to fight alongside you.
Hermione sniffed and moved over to give Ron a good-night kiss. Ginny gave Harry the same treatment before the two girls headed up to their rooms. Harry, Ron and Neville did the same. Seamus and Dean were still up when the three teenagers walked into their sixth-year room, but they didn't say much as their classmates got ready for bed. Finally, when everyone was in their beds and the lights were off, Dean cleared his throat.
Harry?
He paused and then sighed.
You did a really great job tonight. I mean, we all had a lot to deal with, and not much adult support. But you really stepped up. And I was glad to follow you.
Harry was glad the darkness hid his blush.
Thanks, Dean,
he replied, feeling touched by his dormmate's faith in him. Seamus grinned. We really did kick some serious Death Eater ass tonight, didn't we? They all laughed and agreed, before dropping off quickly to sleep. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Okay, interesting chapter, that one. So Dumbledore's not dead. Wow, I cannot believe I forgot that after reading this, but then again, it has been years. Just my memory is normally better than that. And also that bit with Percy at the beginning. Yes! Ah, I've read stories like this where it goes amazingly, and then suddenly Percy's a Death Eater. I'm just like, what? Okay, fanfiction is fanfiction, and literally anything can happen, but I'm just like, I know Percy's ambitious, but Death Eater? Really? Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care!